UrbanTalk would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we record this podcast, the Gadigal of the Eora Nation. We recognise and we celebrate our continued connection to country, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Hello and welcome to the second episode of the Planning Congress podcast. In partnership with the Planning Institute of Australia, UrbanTalk is once again hosting a special podcast series in the lead-up to the 2025 National Planning Congress that will take place in Darwin, Garamela country between May 28 and 30. Through this podcast, we'll bring you interviews with key local and international speakers so that you can get a taste of what to expect at Congress. My name is Belinda Barnett and I'm the podcast host. In this episode, I'm delighted to welcome Ellen Dunham-Jones, a professor of architecture and the director of the urban design degree at the Georgia Institute of Technology. Ellen was voted one of the world's 100 most influential urbanists by Planetizen and hosts the Redesigning Cities podcast. Ellen and her co-author June Williamson have co-authored 2 books. The first, Retrofitting Suburbia, Urban Design Solutions for Redesigning Suburbs, was deemed a Bible for the retrofitting movement by the Chicago Tribune and also received a Prose Award for Architecture and Urban Planning. Their second book, Retrofitting Suburbia, Urban Design Solutions for Redesigning Suburbs, goes further and documents case studies of how past-century suburbs, shopping malls and car parks across the United States are being reinvented into vital and prosperous spaces for future generations. Ellen's work is relatable and transferable, which makes her a must-see speaker at Congress. Today, Ellen is joining us from Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome, Ellen.
Thank you, Belinda.
Very big thank you for taking time out from your evening, because it's, I think, around 7 o'clock over there, to join us. I really thank you very much. When we were preparing for the podcast, you shared that coming to Congress wouldn't be your first time visiting Darwin. You actually lived in Darwin as a student on a school exchange program back in 1976, which would have been just after Cyclone Tracy. What an incredible adventure that must have been. You're certainly going to see some vast changes.
I absolutely loved my time in Darwin. The Dodswells were my host family. I'm going to revisit with them.
Oh, that's fabulous.
When I return. But I must say, I would never have imagined back then that I would be invited back as a professional.
Ellen, can you start by giving us an insight into yourself and I guess how your interest and journey into suburbia began? Was there a pivotal moment or experience that piqued your interest?
On the one hand, it really was I started attending the Congress for the New Urbanism, which is now quite a large organization. I went initially as an academic spy. I completely agreed with the critique of suburbia. I grew up in New Jersey, the most suburban state in the US, but I was suspicious of the sometimes sort of pastel-colored porch imagery. It seemed overly Disney-fied to me. But I learned so much. I've never missed a CNU since. And the Congress for New Urbanism focuses both on redeveloping and reinvigorating our downtowns. It works on trying to preserve more of our countryside, but it was the area of retrofitting suburbia that I felt was so important because that was what I resonated with personally. And I thought the projects were just incredibly important, but they weren't sexy enough to be published in the architecture or planning magazines much. And I just sort of said, with my co-author June, we're academics. Let's just document this stuff.
So would you say you're bringing the sexy back to suburbia?
Oh, as much as possible.
Well, that's a very good thing then. So at the Planning Congress, you're presenting Retrofitting Suburbia for Urban Challenges. Your session will address the challenges that yesterday's suburbs were never designed for. So challenges like automobile dependency, public health and well-being, our ageing population, local employment generation and sustainability. To help us understand, I guess, retrofitting suburbia, can you first outline what you mean by suburban form?
June and I my co-author, we really don't care about the municipal designation if something is called a suburb or not. We are urban designers. We care about the form. So suburban form, typically, I'm totally stereotyping here, but is made up of boxes surrounded by asphalt or lawns. The street networks are tree-like. Think of the highway as the trunk of the tree. The arterials are the branches. and the cul-de-sacs are all the little twigs. In contrast, urban form is typically characterized by boxes that front sidewalks and align to form a street wall. If there's parking, it's either behind or below the buildings. The street networks form small-ish walkable blocks, most often in some form of a grid. And there are plenty of cities that contain surface car parks that, in my opinion, should be retrofitted. And there are plenty of suburbs that have a few blocks of good urban form that should be preserved, if not augmented.
So when we talk about the term retrofitting suburbia, what do you mean exactly by that term, and why do our suburbs need retrofitting?
Retrofitting to us is principally about updating our aging commercial properties, all the car parks, and the infrastructure to better address today's realities of climate change, social diversity, an affordable housing crisis, loneliness and obesity epidemics, an aging population, as well as increasingly work from home and online shopping. And that sort of 1950s, 60s model of suburbia that was based on cheap energy and starter homes for young families with one car and a stay-at-home mom no longer matched Australia's or the US's demographics or community needs. They're in need of a retrofit.
So what are the forces that you see that are driving the decline of traditional suburban developments that are making them obsolete?
The first thing to state is there are plenty of leafy, beloved residential neighborhoods that will probably hold value for a long time. Most of those were built in the 1920s. Many were walkable to a little commercial town center. They included big homes, small homes, even a few apartments. Some of them even had transit. Those amenities, their compactness and mix of uses really have served them well and helped maintain a solid tax base. However, it's the post-World War II suburbs that tended to really be divided into single-use chunks. Residential, large lots over here, multifamily over there, smaller lots, in another part of town, the shopping centers, the business parks way out there. And this version of drivable suburbia was so much more spread out, and it had just many more miles of roads, pipes, fire hydrants, even fire trucks per capita. And I don't know the tax situation in Australia, but in the US, the taxes from all that low density development do not come close to covering the maintenance costs of all the repairs that this aging infrastructure increasingly requires. And add to that, the retail and office buildings, especially the retail buildings, are really not aging well. They weren't built for a long-term lifespan in the first place. And then online shopping, the pandemic, work from home are just adding to their decline and to the loss of tax revenues for their communities. But what June and I get excited about is that it's those exact same sites that are providing the opportunities for these communities to either grow new revenue through redevelopment or provide needed social infrastructure through reuse, or add environmental resilience through regreening, because we never should have built there in the first place.
That's a very interesting point. If we had our time over, we wonder what the urban landscape would actually look like. What I particularly love about your work is that it's being embraced not only by urban designers and planners, but also by the communities that are living within the suburbs that are being transformed. You are essentially, I guess, bringing on board what can be stereotyped as the NIMBY movement. I know you're going to be speaking more about this at Congress, but can you give me a broad overview of the top-line benefits of suburban retrofitting?
It's kind of difficult because I have over 2,500 suburban retrofits in my database, and I keep finding new, creative ways that communities are leveraging retrofits. But in general, in the US, it's fair to say that in strong suburban markets with growing populations, redevelopment of dead shopping malls or infilling the car parks at business parks with compact, walkable, mixed-use town centers greatly increases tax base, reduces per capita carbon footprints, and better serves today's demographics. In places with less strong markets and stagnant or declining population, it's the reuse or what we often refer to as reinhabitation of those commercial boxes with more community service, more community serving uses like healthcare, education, and jobs. And those can be extremely beneficial at a much lower cost. And then surprisingly, while regreening does not happen as often as it should, in my opinion, the replacement of car parks with beautifully designed stormwater parks have the double benefit of providing an adaptation to climate change while at the same time creating lakefront property and attracting new development to previously flood prone or often low income areas.
In your book, you both talk about, I guess, the role of design and retrofitting in creating social diversity. And I guess fundamental to this is correcting this imbalance that seems to occur in suburban locations between private and public space. In fact, you identify the third space that exists. Can you elaborate a little bit more about this?
To generalize, the post-war suburbs produced a much beloved private realm. I mean, most people love their home. But it produced a kind of trashy public realm, traffic clogged arterial roads lined with a fairly chaotic mix of fast food, big box stores, and strip malls. And the more lousy the public realm became, the more the private homes internalized all the traditional forms of socializing. Now we have the big monster TVs instead of going to a theater. We have a jungle gym in every backyard instead of taking the kids to a park, etc. Now we all value privacy, but as household sizes have shrunk, as the kids have fledged, and social media has taken over, we're lonely. And retrofits increasingly include both activated town greens and lively Main Street pubs to provide communities with more so-called third places in which to socialize. So if home is the first place and work is the second place, it's really the pub, the park. Those are the third places, and the hierarchies that are associated with the first and second do not apply in the third place. And that's really, I think, what makes them especially important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love your reference to the third place isn't something that has to be a green space. That it, as you said, it can be a cafe, it can be a pub.
Absolutely.
But the importance of being, I guess, making allowances in planning regulations and zonings that are incorporating and enabling those types of uses to open up within suburbia and not just making them the domain of downtown, as you might say, or more inner city locations, I think is really important. You've been touching on this, the concept of the importance of retrofitting in, I guess, realigning the tax base. Many Australian councils are finding it very difficult to fund infrastructure renewal and also new infrastructure, and are dependent on state and federal government grants that are often in short supply and not enough to go around. When we were preparing for the podcast, you indicated, and as I said, you've touched on it again just while we've been talking, that one of the key benefits of retrofitting is it allows for the upgrade of ageing infrastructure sort of through a realignment of the tax base. Can you talk a little bit more about this? Because I think it's a really important message to get out there to sell retrofitting policy, particularly like in Australia, to local governments and to get them on board.
Absolutely. I mean, I was quite sort of surprised, but have become a complete believer when Chuck Marohn, a civil engineer here in the US and leader of a movement called Strong Towns, he called suburbia a Ponzi scheme and pointed out that as in his practice as a civil engineer, he was often having to go in and widen the roads and help build new communities, but recognized that the communities end up paying for the maintenance of the older subdivisions only with the taxes brought in by new development, because you have to just keep growing. So like all Ponzi schemes, this works for a while. But once you run out of land and communities, I mean, what defines a suburb or any municipality? It only has so much land. So once you run out of land, the only way to really increase your tax base, if you're not successful in getting grants from the federal government or the state, the solution is to rebuild those aging, underperforming, typically commercial properties at greater density. And Joe Minicozzi of Urban 3 is an architect who began analyzing, he came up with a really interesting metric as a way to study communities, which was the property taxes or rates on a per hectare basis. Because you only have so much land. So how many hectares have you got? How much property revenue, tax revenue, are you actually bringing in? He then will map and show that even those small urban properties, but they're built at higher density and they're bringing in a lot of revenue. And you look at the more suburban, low density areas, and they're just not bringing in anywhere near the same kind of benefits. So I'll show some of Joe's work that he's done in Perth that looks at applying this metric, and it really does show that the perspective of a lot of understandably, a lot of suburban homeowners feel like I'm paying way too much in taxes, and we can all sympathize with that. But when you do look at it on a per hectare basis, no, you're not paying enough.
And I think that's a really, important distinction. I think this type of analysis is important to be undertaken when, like these new ideas for transformation are being put on the table and discussed with communities. I mean, personally, I really feel this economic argument or imperative needs to be part of discussion as much as the actual physical design or even the environmental sustainability attributes of retrofitting. In your book, Case Studies in Retrofitting Suburbia, your second book, you present several case studies of locations. In fact, you said at the outset you've done 2,500 case studies between you and June, which is just mind-blowing. All of these locations have been successfully retrofitted. From your research, I'm interested to understand who is driving the retrofitting process. Is it private landowners? Is it developers? Is it government? Or is it very much a collaborative approach?
I would absolutely say almost every single one of these is a public-private partnership in some kind. And even in the few cases where they weren't, I've spoken to the developers and they say, yeah, we should have made it more of a collaboration. But most of the time, when a community does rezone because they want to see redevelopment, that then attracts the developers. So the developers who are interested in rezoning, they would rather not have to be the ones to lead that fight. So they will tend to ignore the communities that have not rezoned, and they will tend to go to those that are already, that it's clear that's what the community already wants. Increasingly, what's been actually, I think, kind of fascinating to me is that I'm seeing cities take on the role of master developer themselves.
Wow.
That not a lot. Okay, I mean, there's about 7, 8. It's not a huge number, but the reason is that they will have a sort of property that they put out a request for proposals because they've rezoned it. They know they want what they want, and then they go through negotiations with developers and they find that the developers are often saying, yeah, that's what we want to do too. But first, we're going to need to kind of put in some big boxes and the communities are just saying, no, that's not what we want. And so in order to get what they want, and especially on these are mostly on big shopping mall sites. So large sites, the cities feel if they have a master plan and then they release only, portions of the site for redevelopment at a time to different developers, they get that more organic kind of city building, that it's not all one developer, it's not all cookie cutter. The developers are actually slightly competing with each other to provide a few more amenities. It's actually a very, very interesting model, but you have to have city staff that are able to do that. And it's certainly not something I would recommend for community. I find communities sometimes that the cities want the redevelopment so badly that they are willing to put more of their kind of patient capital into a project. Frankly, they should be a little more, sometimes I think, be more cautious. If the banks are not going to lend to a private developer, there's a reason. So it's a delicate balance.
You've got these 2,500 case studies. At Congress, are you going to be sharing some of these case studies about successful retrofitted suburbs?
Oh, absolutely. Honestly, I teach a whole course in this. I could talk for hours and hours, but I won't. And I won't show all 2,500 as much as I'd like to. But I will show examples both of redevelopments, adaptive reuse, and of regreenings. And one of my favorites is the Highland Mall in Austin, Texas, which combines all three strategies. And it does it really well.
Let's move to thinking about Australia and lessons, I guess, from your work for Australia. The current priority in Australia is providing more housing. It's most probably a similar priority in the United States, particularly affordable housing. Our state governments have responded by driving a strategic planning approach that's centred around high-density, transit-orientated development, and also by increasing missing middle, medium-density opportunities. How do the principles of retrofitting suburbia deliver affordable housing? And is there a case study that you'll be able to share that has been successful in this area?
Absolutely. There are lots of them. And almost all of the redevelopments include at least 15% of the housing is affordable, but it's at different tiers of affordability and relative to the local incomes in that area. But there are also some great examples of infilling existing residential neighborhoods with missing middle housing, including cottage courts and three-story duplexes. That's kind of the sweet spot of the most affordable. It's not highly dense, but at that point, the International Building Code allows you to not have to put in sprinklers and kind of the higher cost construction. And those fit into an existing residential neighborhood, usually really beautifully. One of the, I think, most important strategies, and I'm glad to hear that the emphasis on transit can't be underestimated. If you really want affordability, in Atlanta, where I live, the most affordable housing is often the furthest away, because that's the cheapest land. And so as a result, if you're in the lower half of incomes in Atlanta, chances are you're spending more of your income on transportation than you are on the housing. So really, it's when we can bring affordable housing and bring transit together, that's when we really get affordability. And one of the best examples, recent examples in the US, is in Tempe, Arizona. And it's the first in the US built from scratch, car-free housing development. It's right at a transit station. It was a commercial, semi-industrial, not that large, but property. And it's really remarkable. So there's no parking except for a couple of spaces, because they do have a small grocery store on site. So the grocery store has some. When you don't have to provide parking, every single dimension can shrink. So the housing, every unit is 16 feet wide, which means you get cross ventilation completely. They're arranged in little courtyards that I was there at 4 p.m, fully shaded. No, and this is hot Arizona climate. It's all rental, but it really just reduces the costs. And then they provide, if you have a guest coming, there's a guest unit you can rent. And if you need an office, they've got all these they've really thought through what car-free housing could be, but yet making it really affordable and frankly, really hip. It's like really social courtyards. It's a quirky plan because it's so focused on optimizing the outdoor thermal comfort. So making sure if you want people to walk and bike, you've got to provide enough shade. You've got to make beautiful vistas. It's really a remarkable example.
Oh, well, I hope you're going to be presenting that one at the Congress. How do the challenges facing US suburbs compare to those in Australia, do you think? I think they're most probably very, very similar, I'd say.
Exactly. As far as I can tell, we have much in common. But as far as I can tell, Australia does not have nearly as many dead shopping malls. I saw a few headlines that seem to imply that number might be growing and that Australia might be having more issues with small businesses that are failing rather than kind of big commercial properties. Some of the financing is quite different, and it seems that adaptive reuse only applies to heritage buildings, but maybe I just didn't know what terms to Google when I was doing my research. Don't you reuse your former retail spaces as well?
Oh, we do. I guess they're sort of referred to as, urban renewal projects, but we do. And a lot of the time we're, as we were talking about before the podcast, very much into mixed use developments and taking, I guess, that siloed land use and looking at how it can be broadened up to cater and to make it more relevant, but also importantly to add to its vibrancy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm interested, with the affordable housing, that we're quite similar, like setting like a 15% sort of target for the provision of affordable housing. Do you think in both our instances we're going far enough? Do you think it should be a lot higher?
The need is certainly much greater. I mean, the wait list for all of our anything remotely affordable is never enough. I think what's also really I see in the US is the sort of suburban apartment complexes. The peak year of construction was 1959. We built lots of these sort of just barrack-like kind of apartment complexes. Those today are absolutely the housing of last choice. They're often moldy. They're not very healthy places. They're certainly not attractive, but they are the last resort affordable housing and need to be preserved because we are simply not building anywhere near enough. And there's actually some really terrific examples, especially one here in Atlanta, of going in and just making really slight little modest changes, putting in an after school program. Makes a phenomenal difference, has just tremendous ripple effects by preserving some of those and making improvements to the existing truly affordable, unsubsidized housing that we already have.
So what other lessons from your research could be, I guess, the most valuable for Australian urban planners and policymakers?
Yeah, I mean, I do think one of the most important is just don't be satisfied trying to solve one problem. I think the suburbs, as you mentioned, they were designed in silos. The engineers were doing their thing. The planners were doing something else. The architects, nobody was really talking to each other. They're sort of each optimizing their system, and it didn't really work out all that well. And I would say, when we wrote our first book, if you were doing anything to reduce car dependency, you made the book. We had 80 case studies at that point, and that was where the bar was. And then as I was maintaining the database, it's just the retrofits started getting more ambitious. They were better and better designed. And we said, okay, we have to write a second book because now communities are really sort of saying to their developers, okay, while it's a given, you're going to try and reduce car dependency. While you're reducing car dependency, what are you doing for public health, for an aging population, for climate change, for equity, all these other things. And so the second book, really, the case studies that we included might be principally focused on one of those challenges, but they're actually also layering in solutions to as many as possible.
Yeah, it's very much about systems, isn't it? Systems within systems. And while I guess suburbia historically was driven by car dependency and was responsible for the form that it's taken, being able to reap all of these other benefits, as you say, it's very exciting. If you could suggest one key area for Australian suburbs to focus on in the next decade, what would it be?
I would actually still say reducing car dependency.
Yeah.
Because honestly, unless you reduce car dependency, you cannot solve any of the others. It's really still job one. All of the others are exacerbated. The challenges are exacerbated by too much dependence on cars. And I know it's really hard. There are places that it's just either ridiculous, incredibly expensive. We don't have enough funds for enough transit and enough things. But I do think that really is still the key one. And it's kind of the starter one. But so it's, again, try to make that one the given and then try to layer on solutions to all the others.
Have you found, I guess, as part of your work, there's been been a big education process with communities to wean them off cars?
I would say there's a generational change more than I would say that it's strictly communities. I do think I'm often sort of brought in to show an area that is facing some retrofits. I will come in and I show with my slides, I always show the existing condition, the before condition, and then show the retrofit. And what I find is that suddenly softens a lot of the NIMBYs. A lot of folks sort of say, well, if that's what you mean by mixed use, and okay, I get that it is denser, but that actually looks nice and works together, and it's not just density for density's sake. I can actually see myself hanging out there and wanting to be there. Because everyone can relate to the before images. Suburbia was pretty cookie cutter. Every community can kind of go, oh, yeah, we have one of those. We have one of those.
Yes, very much so.
And yet the retrofits, there's a little bit of formula repetition in plenty of the retrofits, but in general, the retrofits always become that much more unique as they respond to really what that community's challenges are. And that tends to really help the communities feel invested. I mean, you engage with the communities. That's the other big difference. I mean, when the suburbs were built, there was not a whole lot of community engagement or anything. And now there really is, but it is the older retirees who have the time to come to those community meetings, and they want, and understandably so, they want to protect their community, and they want it to attract kind of households that look just like them when they moved in. And I think showing them also in the US now, the majority of households are or two person households. We will soon be at majority one person households.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it?
Exactly. And it's such a mismatch with this image of, no, everybody wants a single family home. No, they don't.
No, exactly. And just as we sort of talked about the importance of setting out the economics behind these projects, is the importance of setting out the demographics behind the projects and really understanding the characteristics of the population, not just the existing population, but the forecast population that you're actually having to provide for. And again, I think a lot of that is oversimplified in our discussions that underpin these types of new projects.
I think there's also a need to also really try to engage with community members about try to make it personal. Do you want your kids to be able to afford to live here? And can they, as it is right now?
Yes.
But also just to talk about the issues of what they value and private life versus public life. And I think I'm seeing a lot more people actually wanting a more public life. I think some of that is maybe just a hangover from the pandemic where we were deprived of it and now we seek it out. But I do think getting folks to really see that the purpose of wealth accumulation is not just isolating yourself in your castle is important too.
Yeah, and I think particularly as we are having the rise of the single person household, people crave to be amongst other people, which brings us back to, the concept of the third place, and why we have to proactively be thinking. I mean, we are still communities that are comprised of people, and so we have to be catering for our needs. Well, I'm going to bring our podcast to a close, because I know it's getting late over there. But thank you, Ellen, so much for taking the time to join us. This is a fascinating topic that has wide application all around the world. Your keynote should not be missed, and it will give delegates, I know, a lot of practical advice. And I'm very excited about hearing more about the case studies that you're going to be presenting. Ellen, for anyone who can't make it to Congress, how can they find out more about your work?
Retrofittingsuburbia.com is a website that June and I built. Honestly, we haven't really maintained it much, but it does have information on both of the books. And if I can get some grad students to help me, I'll update it with some more articles.
If you haven't been to a Congress before, I encourage you to seize the moment and make your way to Darwin. Set aside the 28th to the 30th of May in your diary, escape the cooler autumn weather and head to Congress. Sunset cocktails at the Darwin Yacht Club are waiting, and yes, there is a margarita with your name on it at the bar. To learn more, go to the Congress events page at the PIA website. If you have any questions, please email congress@planning.org.au. To hear more about the Planning Congress series or to listen to one of our regular podcasts, follow the UrbanTalk podcast feed in your app of choice and leave a review to help others find the podcast. If you're a developer or a planner looking to have an online presence or need help with community engagement, then get in touch. If you're a developer or planner looking to have an online presence or need help with community engagement, then get in touch with us at urbantalk.com.au. I'm Belinda Barnett, and thank you for listening to the Planning Congress 2025 podcast.